Thank you for bringing your work alive to us, all of you. Thank you so much. I have some general questions I'd like to ask the entire group, and then I have some more specific ones for each panelist. And we will then open the discussion up to the audience. And I look forward to hearing that, the questions from the audience. One of the first question I want to put forward to the entire group, what were the challenges that you've come up against in the work you do, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I'll start. I've learned a lot from the HIV/AIDS campaigns. How do you tell the people that they need to use condoms if they've had sex for centuries, thousands of years? How do you do that? It's hard, but it's been done. I remember in Nicaragua, they said no macho, no Latin macho would ever use them, but they do use them. But we have that same in purifying water. Why should we purify water if we drank that water all the time? So it's that conceptual change or something is the most, I find, the most difficult thing to convince people of that they need to drink clean water.
For me, I guess there are two major challenges. It's easy if you provide an opportunity for poor people to improve their lives, they jump on it very fast. And yet if you talk to the development institutions and some of the major players, there is a curious inability to see the obvious. So I'd say challenge number one is getting people in the West, in developed countries, to see and do the obvious. The second thing is, it's a lot easier to design a tool or a piece of equipment than it is to mass market it. Once you've got the design done, which is no easy task, you're probably about 20% of the way there. The other 80% is the marketing and distribution problem.
I'm going to talk about two challenges which we have very realistically faced. The first one, I would call it internal, in that we are dealing with a group of people who have never actually had a hearing aid before, and because in most of our countries we don't even have the distribution system or healthcare system to support such people to begin with. And so distribution channels in itself is very difficult, because we'd like this unit, the solar recharger unit, to go, one, to people who have hearing aids already, because it can help them with their battery use, and two, to people who do not have hearing aids, because we also we distribute it with our low-cost hearing aid. The second challenge we have come from is that we are a team of young people. I am the oldest in the office, and we are people who have designed it from the developing countries. Everyone knows Africa is perceived as something, you think of baskets and crafts and so forth, and you come up with a technology which goes hand in hand with a medical device. Of course, you have those challenges, and having developed it, it makes it that much harder for us to market to other areas, although it is addressing a problem which is not only, only in developing countries. We have also distributed some of our units to the developed countries. So those are the two major challenges we face.
Great. I think I have to agree with Paul that the actual design is of course challenging. You have to figure out what to design and how to design it and meet all the design criteria, which is no easy task. But when you actually look at getting these things out there, distributing them, and more importantly, convincing people to buy them and use them, that's where the real challenge starts. And so many people look at this field and say, let me design a very cool looking object, which meets some great design criteria, and then looks for someone to say, oh, all the poor people should just start using this thing. Now in our case, we're selling a very, very big ticket item, because even a $35 or even a $20 irrigation pump is a major purchase for a poor person. It's something they've never seen before in their life. And yes, they can see the benefit that they're going to get from it when they look at it and they see you irrigating. But still, that's a lot of money they have to save up, and it means they probably won't eat for a few days or maybe a few months, or eat less. And they're extremely risk adverse because they have almost no savings, so they have to be risk adverse. Because if they buy one of these pumps and it goes wrong, yeah, they're going to go hungry. So I think that's really the hardest thing, is how do you convince an extremely poor person to either change a behavior, as you talked about, or in our case, it's to buy a new product they've never seen before, which is expensive but is going to change their life. And of course, the final challenge is, for all of us, I'm sure, is raising the funds to make this happen. It's always a difficult thing and something that a lot of us spend a lot of our time working to do. Thanks.
Thank you. This is to the whole group also. What got you interested in this type of work? Maybe we'll start with Modesta.
Well, my first job and my background mainly, I have always worked with people with hearing impairments. And from the beginning, I've always worked with them. I worked for an organization which owns the only 2 deaf schools in Botswana, which hardly take up about 8% of all the children who should be in schools. And it's from there that what I realized was that the only reason why most of these children are not learning as much as they should, and why most deaf people are not at the levels they should be, is because they are not taking full advantage of having a hearing aid. They don't have it, or if they have it, they just use it when the battery's flat. After 4 or 5 days, they put it aside and wait for the next one to be given to them. So that discontinuity is something which made me join what used to be Camp Hill, which is a movement for people with disabilities. But then I came there, they said, well, we'd like you to come and work with us, but we're branching out into a certain program. And I said, okay, condition is deaf people, 1, and yes, I would like to do something about hearing aids. So it's with that background that I joined the team.
Great, thank you. Paul?
I'm a scuba diver, and maybe 35 years ago, I went on a dive trip to Belize and met Willard Young, who's a fisherman. And my diving buddy is a commercial fisherman from Canada. And Willard invited us to go back to the island if we brought him an Acroland sail for a sailboat. So we came. My wife Aggie, who's sitting there, just about killed me because we took this sailboat 50 miles out to the island. With no life jackets. But the girls knew how to hold their breath. One thing led to another, and we started a fishing project to help Willard with his fishing. He was a lighthouse keeper, but he also made money catching fish. That failed miserably, but it got me hooked, and one thing led to another.
Martin?
In my case, I come from an academic family, and I did a PhD in mechanical engineering at Stanford, and realized I was uniquely qualified to either try to teach at the university or to work in a research lab doing military research or doing research for big oil. And being young and idealistic, none of that really excited me too much. And meanwhile, I'd met a number of people from developing countries in my graduate program. And a few of them had sort of introduced me to appropriate technology and told me that this would be something I should get interested in. And I thought, well, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life designing pumps for poor people. But when it actually came down to it, at the end of my PhD, I went to Peru to go trekking in the mountains, because I was a big trekker back then. And that was really the first time I came face to face with the rural poverty and true poverty in a developing country, and came back from that trip just convinced that actually maybe I should look at this. Maybe there is a role for technology here. And I said, let me apply for a Fulbright fellowship to go back to Peru and try to look at the relationship between technology and poverty. And a few days before the application was due, they told me, sorry, you don't speak Spanish, you're not going to Peru. And I literally flipped through their catalog and said, oh, Kenya, they speak English there, don't they? And applied to go to Kenya, got lucky enough to go, and went down there, and like I say, went down for 10 months, stayed for 17 years. But once you get into this work, it's absolutely captivating. You just see the problems out there, and you just get drawn to realizing you have to do something to solve it. And it's extremely satisfying work also, of course. So that's how it happens.
So the main message in all of this is that it's all very carefully planned.
And Ron, how did you
Well, I'm a potter, and I was, as a young man, I used to want to go out and help the world, and I thought you had to only be a doctor. And I found when I was trained how to make these water filters, I found that it was an empowerment. I felt very proud that as being a potter, I could actually help a lot of people. And every potter that I train feel the same way. So we've constructed like an army out there of people who make water filters, and it's empowering. It just feels great being able to fulfill a need, and I loved it, so I'm addicted to it. I like killing bacteria. I mean, it's fun. Fun.
Great. Now I'm going to go to some of the more individual questions. Martin, you've stated that Kickstart's mission is to build a middle class in Africa, where your work can put democracy in place. How do you see that being accomplished?
Well, if you really look at the problems in Africa, the real fundamental problem in Africa is a problem of governance. I mean, Africa is a continent with amazing natural resources and amazing people, hardworking people. There's no reason Africa should be poor. But why is it poor? It's poor because it's got governments who are corrupt, who don't really care for the welfare of their people, and who steal a lot of money and don't make the best of what they could do. So why is this? Well, we've got democracy in place in Africa, democracy in quotes, but the reality is in Africa, you can go out and buy a vote for $1 or even less than $1. And we read about this the other day, just last week in Nigeria. And if you read the article in The Economist, they actually talk about the cost of the vote, and it was not many naira. And as long as you can buy a vote for $1, democracy simply can't work. And so we say what you need to do is you need to raise the cost of a vote. Let's raise the cost of the vote to $10, $20, $30. And then democracy starts to work a little better. And once democracy starts to work a little better, you get slightly better government. And the slightly better government puts slightly better policies in place and is slightly less corrupt. And then there's more local investment. And then there's more foreign investment. And then there's a bigger middle class. And then the cost of the vote goes up. And so hopefully we can turn it around and have this upward spiral to solve the problems in Africa. And this can only happen by building a middle class who are not going to sell their vote for $1. And this can only happen by taking very poor people, because everybody's very poor, and turning them into the middle class. Well, luckily, they're very entrepreneurial and hard work, and if you give them opportunities, not handouts, but opportunities to get ahead and look after their families and join the middle class, they're going to do anything and everything to do that. And so that's where we come from.
Great. Modesta, there's an ongoing discussion about patent infringement as designs quickly spread around the globe. I understand that Godiza Technology decided not to patent the SolarAid recharger. Several projects we have included in the exhibit have moved toward a more quote-unquote open source approach to design. Why did Godiza Technologies make this choice?
Okay, patents come in probably different forms. What we have done is actually protected the designs. We've registered our designs and are patenting the designs, but at this very early stage, we chose not to patent it with the first generation charger, because we're also in development of new products, improved products of what we have now. Is first of all, a patent takes so much to get. To maintain is so much more. And this is a trap. Well, this is what most of the bigger manufacturers of hearing aids and mostly other type of projects are doing, because they pay for patents, pay for R&D, pay so much for all these related things. A product comes out, you have a hearing aid which probably costs $2,000 a piece, which even if found its way to Africa and other developing countries, no one would even touch. So right now what we're trying to do is to try and get as many solar recharger units and low-cost hearing aids out there to people all over the world to keep it affordable. That's what we're doing right now. But of course, with new developments and with growth, patent may not be too far out, but we also want to make sure we stick to our mission of lowering the cost of hearing health care. And in future, hopefully in the long term, we're also looking at lowering the cost of various medical devices. Of course, hearing health being the first part, but we will branch out to that. But that's the basic reason why we did not immediately take a patent out.
Thank you. Ron, you've worked worldwide selling, setting up facilities to make these filters. How do you help them stay sustainable over time?
Good question. We don't go in until there's something sustainable already. We only work with existing potters. That means they already make pottery, they already export, or they already sell locally. In the case of Ghana, the person who produces filters exports to Pier 1 in the States. So he's established, he knows what orders are, he has the kilns, he has the equipment, and we introduce some technology. But that's at the high end. And then we work with the women here. Like we said in Darfur, we had a guaranteed sales because Oxfam would buy some, and United Nations and the other NGOs. Now this is good and bad when NGOs start buying them, but they give them away. So we talk to NGOs saying, well, we prefer you sell them, but if they don't listen, it's a problem. But we do sell. Nothing's given away.
Paul, you've called for a revolution in design, to change the way design is taught and create a platform for the world's designers to address the problems of the other 90%. How do you see this being accomplished?
Well, in the West, the students in the university are demanding it. They're pushing the professors. The talks I've given about providing an opportunity for students in engineering, the humanities, business, to design things that are, solve the problems of the poor is immense. And for instance, at Caltech, a group of students were so emphatic about it that they roped the professor into teaching a class and designing several technologies for people in Guatemala. So I think there's a huge demand for students learning to make a difference in developed countries. In developing countries, it's a little tougher. A lot of the students in a place like India have had their eyes set on finding a job in Silicon Valley and making a lot of money. That's beginning to change. But I think that now that we have Columbia and Caltech and MIT and Stanford doing this, it'll spread very rapidly to developing countries. The third part is also very interesting. It's to provide a platform that will allow 10,000 of the world's best designers, some of them are sitting right here, to participate in designing things for the other 90%. That is also happening. There are some remarkable people. One of the people that's helped us with irrigation technologies is Jack Keller, who's even older than I am. And he's a retired professor. He's a world authority on irrigation. He's built some of the large irrigation systems in the world, and now he's just finished designing a low-cost, small plot sprinkler system that operates on a very low pressure and is very uniform. There are thousands of people like that, and I found that they're keenly interested, but they don't have an opportunity. You have to have a place where you can go and a problem to work on, and there is just an enormous interest in this whole field. The challenge is how to build the platform and the curricula fast enough to meet the demand.
Great, thank you. I have one last general question for the panel, and then we'll send it out to the audience. All of you have made tremendous impact with your work. Tell us about your successes and the work. Tell us about the successes or the impact your work has provided to the end users. So shall we start with Ron and come around to Martin?
Right. Well, we have many studies by some excellent researchers. We have two exceptional studies that actually visit the end users, see if they are, after 3 months, 6 months, a year, are they still using this water? Is that water still safe? Has there been an increase in their health? Have they spent less money going to the doctor? ID did an excellent research on that. UNICEF has paid an extensive study, a 3-month study with Chapel Hill, the University of Chapel Hill. Also, that proves that by using the water filter, plus washing one's hands and other factors that we have to train people to accompany the filter technology, we do have an effect by lowering the cases of diarrhea, which still is the #1 baby killer in the world. So there are studies that prove it.
Bottom line is this, IDE, International Development Enterprises, is the organization I started 25 years ago. It works in 9 countries now. And over 25 years, we have spent about $100 million altogether. Poor people who are less than $1 a day have themselves, 17 million of them, invested more than $100 million of their own money. And the net impact is that they are earning now $300 million a year net forever. And that, once they get on the learning curve, that income goes up. So there is a huge untapped opportunity to make a big difference in the world, designing both the tools and the distribution systems to make them available.
So the biggest impact so far that we've seen, first of all, in deaf empowerment is that we have, when we initially started, we employed deaf people from our own deaf schools in Botswana. And we have trained them to a level of, international certification in hearing aid manufacture and in other quality standard systems. And we, in all through the life of the project, we have given training to about 16 deaf individuals. 8 of them are working now. 4 of them are internationally certified in this particular technology. Other types of empowerment, the impact that it's had is that internally we've produced deaf learning material which we have been able to share with other deaf institutions in our country and hopefully to reach the region. In terms of the provision of a low-cost hearing aid solution, the impact has been greater than we planned in that not only have we been able to distribute it to about 23 countries worldwide, some units have also found their way into Europe and the US. And we have a lot of inquiries about the same. We did realize, but we didn't realize how very pressing the need was to have, the battery use was, and it seems it's universal. A great impact is that now we have Brazil is, I still say it again because this is what we really wanted to achieve, to replicate ourselves, join hands and bring the cost of hearing aid use to go down. So Brazil is ready to go by July, and they should be able to service South America. We are planning together, working hand in hand with Pakistan for Asia, and we're also working hand in hand together with Jordan. And once we get those 3 areas, I believe we would have reached our mission on one level.
And since we use donor funds, we have to measure our impacts very, very carefully because we have to make sure we give the donors a very good bang for their dollar that they give us. And we do this by every time somebody buys one of our irrigation pumps, they go into the little retail shop and they fill out a guarantee form. Now, very often they're illiterate, so they fill it out with the help of the shopkeeper. And on that guarantee form, they put their name and they put the nearest primary school or the nearest church to where they live because they don't have an address. And this gives them a 1-year guarantee. If anything goes wrong with the pump, they get a new pump. It gives us a database of all the buyers. We then randomly select people from that database within the first month of when they've bought a pump. And we go and find them in the field. And it might take a whole day of walking around in the rural area looking for somebody who bought a funny looking pump, but eventually you find them. We sit down with them and we have a 4 or 5 hour interview process where we talk to them and we find out what was their life like the previous year. They haven't had any impact yet from the pump because they just bought it. How much money did they make? What crops did they grow? Were their kids in school? What kind of house did they live in? And then we come back to those same families 18 months later and then again 36 months later. And this is how we tracked our impacts. And this is how we can confidently talk about the fact that we've taken 52,000 families out of poverty. Now, how do we define out of poverty? Because that's our mission, to take people out of poverty. And we define out of poverty as the fact that these families now have enough to eat, so they have good nutrition. They're no longer wondering where the next meal comes from. They have enough clothes to wear. They have a basic house that they're living in. They can educate all of their kids in primary school, and they have enough money for basic health care. And on top of that, they have money to invest in their future. Because I think out of poverty really means you have money to invest in your future. Now, what do they do with that money? Many of them send their kids to college. Many of them build houses. They build rental housing. They'll go buy a new cow, start a new business. But this really defines that their life is now looking on the up. They've changed, and they're out of poverty. And so these 52,000 people, families, these 52,000 families, which is over 250,000 people, with 5 people per family out of poverty, between them making $54 million a year in new profits and wages. And then the question comes, well, that's great, but how much does it cost the donors to do the two things that we do, which is technology development and technology promotion? How much does it cost to get a family out of poverty? And for us, it costs $250 of donor funds to take one family out of poverty forever. And that family will make $4,500 in new profits and wages in their first 4 years of that forever. They'll go on making money forever, but we count that first 4 years. And so that's an 18-to-1 bang for the donor's dollar. So every dollar we take results in $18 in new profits and wages for the people we're trying to help. That's how it works.
So now we're going to open up the conversation to those of you in the audience. I know we have a lot of contributors. We saw a lot of people last night at our members preview, and there's been a real interest in engaging in this conversation.
I would certainly, first of all, like to...
Excuse me, could we, I think with everybody who speaks, it would be great to have your name and identify yourself.
I am Paul Polak, psychiatrist. I am here to protect him from evil eyes. I've had the privilege of going to medical school with Paul, who has really inspired me greatly to become interested in the problems of poverty, and it is truly an excitement for someone who is a new guy on the block to learn about this. Aside from the fact of keeping Paul mentally healthy, I would like to conceptually ask the panel ways how you see this out of poverty into education without the defeat that American cultures have with the kind of narcissistic destruction that we have seen. Any comments?
I think it's a very good question. It's very hard to overcome the desire for many, many things. The desire for a better life, and then the next thing you want is a fancy car, the next thing you want is your fancy flat TV or whatever it is. Of course, poor people aspire to the same things that we do, the same lifestyle that we aspire to. They see what we have and they want those things. They see what's out there and they want those things. Now the hope in the future is that they can have those things in a much more sustainable way than we ever had those things. And you know, one example of that is leapfrog technologies. For example, there's no electricity in rural Africa. And there won't be electricity, what we consider electricity in terms of wired electricity in rural Africa for many, many years. But a place like Kenya has a higher percentage of people using solar electricity than anywhere in the world. 4% of households use solar electricity in Kenya. It's higher than, except for a couple of islands somewhere. And that's because people aspire to that, but in fact they're going to get a much greener solution, a solution which is much better for the environment. So I think it's up to us in the first world to now design solutions which then the third world can leapfrog a lot of the bad and dirty things that we've done and move on to solutions which are actually going to be better for the environment. To get that.
Hi, thank you very much for this panel. My name is Charlene Haynes. I'm a professor at Fordham. I wanted to ask Martin, could you elaborate a little bit more about the marketing scenario that you have to work with, and just when does the marketing process start, and how do you actually put it together to get these pumps out to your farmers?
Well, as I've said, the marketing is the biggest challenge. So the first thing we do is we establish a private sector distribution network. Now these are existing shops which presently very often are selling seeds or fertilizer, but no big ticket items, because a farmer will come in and buy, maybe $1 worth of seeds, a couple dollars worth of fertilizer. And we're going to these shops and we're saying, how would you like to stock a big ticket item, an irrigation pump? And in the beginning, many of them say, no, we're never going to sell that thing. But then we tell them, don't worry, we're going to do the marketing, we're going to convince people to come in and buy them. And so eventually we convince them to stock these things. And so we get a network of the retail shops. And now we have to convince the people to come in. So how do we do this? Because in rural Africa, people don't live on the road. You get to the end of the road and you start walking. And you walk a kilometer, you find people. You keep walking, you find more people. They only come to their nearest marketplace maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. They only come to their nearest town sometimes, maybe once or twice or 3 times a year. So they're very hard to reach. Yes, they have radios, but actually only about half of them have radios. And very often they don't have batteries for that radio. So how do you reach these people? Well, you have to be sure that when they do come to town, you absolutely capture them. So we use a lot of billboards. We have live demonstrations on the roads, at the marketplaces. We do use radio advertisements as much as possible, because when somebody does listen to a radio, a group of people gather around to listen. And so even though only one family has the radio with batteries, it's quite a few people get them. We use newspaper advertisements. In Africa, each individual newspaper is read by something like 10 or 15 people, unlike here where you're lucky if one person reads a paper before you throw it away. So you find someone reading a newspaper from a month old, but they're still reading it. We use the outreach in terms of the newspaper and the advertisements on the radio and live demonstrations and competitions and other kinds of promotions to call people into a place where they can actually test drive the pump with these live demos, where they can get on a pump and test drive it and try it out, just like you would have to for a car, because it's a big ticket item they're buying. And it takes them between 9 weeks and 9 months to make that decision to buy a pump. But eventually they do, and they buy it. So thanks for that question.
Do you use cell phones?
We're starting to use cell phones, and as the cell phones are getting into the rural areas, and what we do is we advertise on the radio and advertise on our billboards a hotline number where someone can telephone in and we will call them back, so they don't have to pay for the call, and tell them anything they want to know now about the pumps. And so that's one way, because cell phones are starting to get out there.
Thank you.
Can I just add a sentence or two to this? What we already know in the West, if you're going to sell Seagram's gin or a Westinghouse refrigerator, you have to have a distribution system and a marketing and promotion campaign. Only you have to modify it to fit the local context. There are places in developing countries where there are no media, so you need to do things like movies, battery-powered movies. You can do traveling minstrel shows. Basically, what people learn in business schools in the West about distribution and marketing is applicable, but you have to radically change it to fit a context of each country. In some places where there's mass media, you can use mass media. In places where there aren't, and where most of the population is illiterate, you have to modify your promotion and advertising to fit the culture that you're in.
My name is David Meyer. I'm a writer and a professor at the New School. I have a question for Ron, please. And I hope you forgive the intensely practical nature of this question, but could you please tell us how your filter works?
Sure. Oops. Okay. I had mentioned that it's a ceramic flower pot. It's very small pores. It's made with clay and sawdust. The sawdust burns out and leaves micron sizes of 6 to 0.2 microns. Most bacteria are 3 microns. They simply don't fit. That's it.
It just seeps through?
The water seeps through and the bacteria doesn't. With a scrub brush, when it gets clogged with turbidity, because of course after a while very dirty water, very turbid water will clog, and then we give instructions, we provide everything for them to scrub it out with a scrub brush. They can rinse it out and they start using it again. And all of this has been studied. We've been studying this for about 3-4 years.
How long does it last?
About 16,000 years. That's because ceramics, you find old ceramics. So no, actually, we've been doing this for 6 years, and we've been testing them in laboratories for 6 years, so we know they last 6 years. We tell the end user to buy another one every 2 years, but that's between us.
How long does it take the water to filter out?
It's a very slow filtration, but it's far more than what a family of 6 needs. So it's about 2 liters an hour. So if you fill it up at night, in the morning you'll have your 24 liters of water. That's enough, and you keep filling it during the day, maybe in the afternoon, and once again at night.
My name's Kyle Schmidt with Public Architecture, and my question is, a few of you touched on how young people have come in and been committed to doing this kind of work. How do you hold those people, and how do you keep it sustainable for them to continue doing this type of work throughout their lives, not just for 2 or 3 years before they go and get their real job?
I'd like to say, I always recommend that besides being architects or engineers, learn to be grant writers. And we tell our people, because we're so small, we say, here's a project, fund yourself. And many have been successful, actually. And when you stop funding yourself, then you stop doing that type of work. But as a simple reason, that's what we say.
I think the long-range answer is to create profitable business opportunities. The short-range answer, what the students say, Jim Patel, who was a business professor at Stanford, said that 10 years ago, students came in and said, teach me to be like Bill Gates. And now the typical business student comes in and says, teach me to make a difference. And a lot of the students that, the course on extreme affordability is oversubscribed. There's about 120 people apply for 35 slots. A lot of the students say, I'm not going to do this, but I want to know about how you make a difference, and when I make enough money, maybe I'll go back to it. Maybe I can contribute to it. And some of the students form their own companies. There are several students that have formed their own companies, have got grant funds. It is, that said, it's a real problem. There isn't a market right now, and that reflects why designers, even though these are fascinating problems, you have to make a living too. So there is no answer to it, but I think that long range, more and more people will seek a career in this, and others just want to learn about the world and how to make a difference.
I just want to add something to that also. I mean, I mentioned before that raising the funds to make this happen is still one of our biggest challenges. And I said it costs us $250 to take a family out of poverty forever, but raising that $250 is difficult. The reality is there are almost no jobs in this field for engineers. We employ a couple of engineers. I don't know how many Paul employs, but maybe overall in this field there's no more than probably 100 engineers who are really paid to do this kind of work. And so we want that to change. So how do we get that to change? And I want to take the lesson from what happened with microfinance. Now some of you might know about microfinance. In microfinance is a way of lending money to extremely poor people. And Muhammad Yunus just won the Nobel Prize for his work on microfinance. And if you look at microfinance 30 years ago, there were no jobs in microfinance. That's when it was just getting invented. Today, there are hundreds and hundreds of jobs in microfinance because donors are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into microfinance. And also, microfinance institutions have now become profitable because they've reached this tipping point where they now can become profitable. We need to take design of these kind of technologies we're talking about to that same kind of scale. And to get to that scale, we need to have huge, successful projects where it's recognized, and we have a movement that Paul was talking about, where we have a movement of people, but amongst the donors, it's recognized that this is something which really works, it really does get people out of poverty, it really does change people's lives. And when we get that kind of momentum going, the money will start to pour into the field, and more programs like IDE, like Kickstart will come up, started by social entrepreneurs, and the money will be there.
My name is Anand Ponnambalam. I'm an engineer by profession. I retired from IBM Corporation, Westchester, and I went back to Sri Lanka, where I was born, and worked for the past 5 or 6 years in the war-ravaged areas of the northeast of the country. And I've just returned back because the war was resumed. I have 2 questions, one for Martin and one for Sergio, I believe. Martin, is when you started, have you had experience in working in any environment where the population has been used to mechanize, pumps that are worked on fuel like kerosene and so on, and whether they would now come back to a manually operated type of water pump? The other question for Sergio is, in our type of background, we are used to boiling water. And there is a concept, there is a general perception that however much you may filter water, that it must be boiled in order to get rid of the germs. Now, have you had any experience in a resistance to filtering, and that it is not sufficient, and that water must be boiled? Do people come up with that type of thing? You first.
It is hard to convince people who are using petrol pumps or electric pumps to go back to manual pumps because they feel they're taking a step backwards. But on the other hand, we actually see it happening a lot. And the way we see it happening is people who start out with our manual pumps, and they go out there and they're making a lot of money, and they think, wow, I'm making a lot of money, let me buy a petrol pump. And they buy a petrol pump, and they move over to using the petrol pump. And then the petrol pump breaks down. And then they realize they have to carry that petrol pump for many miles to get it fixed. And what's more, actually they have to go every week and collect petrol to run it. And so now we see those same people going back to the manual pumps as opposed to the petrol pumps, because they've come there, they've been proven that it works, and so they go backwards. I think it's probably a bigger challenge in your case if you're talking about someone who's never used a manual pump and they're using petrol pumps. To convince them to go back to manual might be a bigger challenge. I don't know if Paul has anything to say about that.
It's again varies from country to country. We're working in Myanmar, and we're selling treadle pumps. Last year we sold 10,000 treadle pumps in Myanmar. One of the reasons is that because the economy is so terrible that the people who had diesel pumps can't get diesel. It's too expensive, and they can't get spare parts. In India, in many countries, diesel is subsidized. In India, the price of diesel has gone up 7-fold in the past few years. Some farmers with diesel pumps are going out of business, and so it really depends on what your other options are that are available. In Sri Lanka, you have kerosene pumps and so on, and I don't know what's happening with the price of fuel. But manual power is a form of renewable energy. So. And where labor costs are fairly low, at some point it's much more cost effective to pump manually. But there are huge opportunities to improve the efficiency of mechanized pumps as well. And those mechanized pumps, people sell excess water and they create water markets. So everything is complicated and it's simple. It depends on what various things cost, what people will use.
In the case of the water filters, we're members of a World Health Organization committee on safe household water. And this committee consists of ceramic filtration, sand filters, SODIs, solar disinfection of water, etc. And they also promote the boiling. It's really up to the community what they want to do. But what we do is use a HAP test. It's a very simple, very low cost, maybe 80 cents, a way of testing a presence and absence of bacteria. We found that if a community does that to their source water, they find that it's contaminated. They could boil it to run another test, or they can filter it. What happens is they usually filter it and find that they save money. We've documented out of Cambodia, ID documented families that make less than $30 a month were saving $2 in fuel when they stopped boiling and started using the water filter. With the added, and this is parenthesis, it tastes better, they said. And that, we said, that was cute, we didn't even think of that. So boiled water doesn't taste too good, sometimes.
So, but the other thing is the cost of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big factor.
Do we want to take one last question, Sheila Kennedy?
I don't know if it's the last question.
Okay, we're at 8 o'clock, so why don't we take this one more question?
Thanks. My name is Sheila Kennedy. I'm with the Portable Light Project. Thank you, everyone in the group, for speaking. Learned a lot. My question goes to how could we briefly brainstorm around the group about the problem of bringing a disruptive technology to people in need. In other words, if we think about the cell phone, it's made a huge difference. It's used all over the global south. It really has helped bring people out of poverty. But I couldn't have used Paul Pollack's criterion, it had to be affordable or don't bother. I would have never bothered making the cell phone because that was a device that started out very expensive, it started out in a very small niche market, and so forth. So we understand the trajectory from Crittenden and all of that about disruptive technologies. So perhaps Modesta, you could start with this because your charger for the hearing aid does use a solar panel, and talk a little bit about how you source that, how you integrate it, or where, do you import that, do you defray costs, or are you at a point where that solar panel it can be something that you can purchase and deliver at low cost? And how would you develop this further to include the new types of solar panels that are thin film, that can't be broken, that are much lighter to ship, and so forth?
Okay. Yeah, you're asking at a very good time. Yes, solar panels in the past have actually been very expensive. I think it's the most expensive component in the whole system. But then what we have noticed in the past 2 to 3 years is that everyone is talking about solar. Everyone is integrating a solar panel into something. And the prices are dropping. And most of these solar panel manufacturers are willing to negotiate, and to go down because there is no more room for an expensive solar panel no matter what size it is. And yes, we are aware of the flexi panels. In our new generation charger, which we are actually working on and designing on through a small grant through the UNDP, this is one of the solar panels that we're looking to make. It will have enhanced features, of course, and we are looking at redesigning it to accommodate a wider range of hearing aids outside our own Hodisa hearing aid range. So yes, it is beginning to change. There's a whole solar power revolution going out there. The prices are dropping, but at this particular moment, we're not in a position to be able to manufacture our own solar panels, unfortunately.
I can comment a little bit on this. If you look at my list and Paul's list, it's a little bit different in terms of the criteria, where my first criteria is that it's a money-making technology and that you can make your investment back in a reasonable time. A cell phone is a magical piece of technology because not only is it a money-making piece of technology for a poor person because it's a pay phone, people actually come and will pay you money to make a phone call, and they'll pay you money because making that phone call is going to save them from getting on a bus and walking and traveling for 2 days to go send a message to the city to come back. So they'll pay money to make that phone call. But it's also a magical piece of technology because the first people who want a cell phone are the wealthy people. I was one of the very early adopters of cell phones in Africa. And at that time, we paid a huge amount of money for the cell phone and a huge amount of money for every call we made. But it was the only option. The fixed line simply didn't work. And so the wealthy people took the cell phone first and paid a lot of money, and it became very profitable for the companies. They used that money to now start promoting the cell phone to poorer and poorer people. So they also didn't need the subsidy that we need to do market development. And also it's an aspirational thing. A wealthy person has a cell phone, I want a cell phone. So it's an easier thing to sell than an irrigation pump, which is a manual irrigation pump, when you know that the wealthy person has a petrol pump. Well, this is not so aspirational. So I think a cell phone is wonderful. Another wonderful thing about a cell phone is it's got a built-in credit mechanism.
Yes.
I can basically give you a cell phone for free, and you're going to be paying me for the rest of your life every time you pay for a minute. These other technologies don't have built-in credit, so they're much harder to sell. But there's not many other technologies like a cell phone. If you look at solar panels, the people who are buying solar panels in Kenya that I talked about, this 4%, these are people who already entered the middle class. These are the people who already bought our pumps and are already making more money. And now they want electricity as well, so they can afford to pay for a solar panel. They can afford to pay for these sort of leapfrog technologies. But I think all our technologies are really disruptive technologies in that we're replacing, with an irrigation pump, we're replacing a bucket and a rope. And a bucket and a rope is extremely hard work. You pull down, you pull up the bucket of water, you walk over, you pour it on the plant or with a watering can, as we saw. This is completely disruptive to bring in an irrigation pump, which now you can sit there, stand in one place and irrigate 2 acres with a hose pipe. So that's my comments about it. Paul, anything else?
Well, I love disruptive technologies, and but when I'm talking about affordability, it isn't necessarily that each technology has to be affordable. It's that the poor person has to have affordable access to something that comes. So a $500 diesel pump 15 years ago in Bangladesh was a disruptive technology for small farmers when there were enough of them that people sold their excess water and created water markets. And those water markets delivered water more cheaply to a poor farmer than investing in a treadle pump. So it really has to do with whether a product or a service earns income, I agree totally with Martin, and is affordable. But the more you have to break something into many units or get a cooperative agreement, you have transaction costs. So it gets a little complicated, but disruptive is anything that earns more money and that benefits the lives of the poor.
Changes the pattern.
And it has to be affordable unless you give it away, and I agree with everybody else that giving it away is not the best way of distributing sustainably.
And that was a great question. Thank you, Sheila. We're going to continue this conversation. I will be writing a blog during the duration of the show, so please go to our website and join in on this what will prove to be, I think, a very, very interesting conversation. Tonight was our first live feed on the internet, so thank you all for participating in that, both here in New York City and worldwide. Thank you all for your participation. It's been a very lively conversation. And I want everyone to know that the shop will remain open until 9 p.m. if you'd like to pick up a catalog. I don't know if everybody's seen the catalog. It has some very, very good essays in it. And please join us in the garden. And we'll continue to look at the exhibition out there, and I believe we will stay open until around 9:45. So thank you all.